So we were introducing some of the characters that are introduced in part two of the novel. We talked a little bit about Leavitt already, but if you want to look on page 89, his character is sort of more fully described. So at the bottom of 89, Leavitt sat at the table reading. When he read, he put on spectacles that made him look old. He was a strange man, Robert decided, eager to be of help and resourceful in his way. He was also a cold man to whom it seemed nothing much existed outside of the mind. He had come all the way back alone with the trumpet to save Robert's life and Poole's, but what he was doing was merely practical. It had nothing to do with courage or lack of it. He was the sort of man who, when asked who was there, said me. Who else might there be? Leavitt is also known in the dugout for his love of books, and it's particular this author Clausewitz, who has written about military strategy, and in quoting Clausewitz on page 90, Leavitt says, Clausewitz says an excess of artillery leads to a passive character in war. He says artillery must seek out great natural obstacles of ground, mountain positions, in order that the topographical impediments may aid the defense and protection of our guns. He says that in a way the enemy's forces must come themselves and seek their own destruction. That way, he says, the whole war can be carried out as a serious, formal minuet. So he makes kind of the comparison to a minuet, like a symphony song. Like a minuet is a musical number, and so he has this idea that war should be done very sort of strategically, and it should function almost like a serious formal production, like an orchestra would do a duet or a song, and he has these sort of real firm ideas of how war should be. And then we see the breakdown of this sense of order and control in part three of the novel, where Leavitt will suffer some sort of reality, suffer a break from reality, we'll say that. But you can make note in your textbook or in the notes, highlight the fact that, Leavitt is known for being practical, and his association with books and the theory rather than the sort of practice of warfare. Introduced to the character of Devlin, and he's often talked about. There's Devlin, Bonnycastle. I get them all confused, but if you make note at this point, it becomes a lot clearer to you who's who. But Devlin is described on page 84. He was a tall, frail man with a droopy mustache and a slightly receding hairline, despite the fact he was only 27. He tended to carry his head thrown back, which gave him at first glance a superior look that might have indicated snobbishness or grandeur. But Devlin was possessed of neither of these traits, anything but. He was gentle as a lamb and wanted to own a shop and sell antiques. So you'll remember when you're reading that Devlin is associated with stained glass windows. He collects stained glass, and he's keeping this one which is depicting a saint. The figure of a bearded man was stripped to the waist and wore a leather apron. He was working on a forge and held a gigantic butterfly and a pair of tongs. It was shown of having just been recovered from the flames in a white-hot state. So this piece of stained glass can be seen as kind of also symbolic of either Devlin or the wars, or the men who are, fragile. But the fact that he cares for and is a collector, and he's trying to preserve these delicate pieces of glass while, there are bombs going off all around them. It does suggest that, like Robert, these men that he befriends in this dugout, these are almost like his band of brothers, right? They're all peculiar in their own way. They all have their sort of idiosyncratic quirks and are interested in more than just war. So they have sort of developed personalities. And Devlin's devotion to fragility seems significant in relation to the fact that, he, like Robert, like Harris, like Rodwell, all seem to be, they're not warmongers, they're not bloodthirsty, they're caring, sensitive, intelligent men who are caught up in this horrific circumstance. And, this is their way of preserving individuality and the beauty of what they care about most. So preserving a little bit of fragility in the glass, something beautiful, is his way of sort of keeping hold of who he is and maybe having a little piece of something beautiful when you're surrounded by the ugliest part of human reality, I guess, the warfare. And then there is Rodwell. So he it also represents a kind of a soldier who has a big heart. He's full of compassion, and he's not sort of the typical what we think of as kind of this macho, violent male soldier. He's actually very sensitive and kind, and he's a father, and he's very compassionate towards animals, which we also know Robert is as well. So Rodwell has all these cages set up where he has this kind of makeshift animal hospital, and in these cages are wounded animals. So these are animals, birds, rabbits, hedgehogs, toads, animals that he has found on the battlefield that have been wounded, and he is taking measures to sort of help them sort of get better, and then hopes of freeing them one day. So there's sort of a parallel between, Rodwell's animals and then the men as well. So that desire for freedom becomes another theme or idea that's part of this caged animal trope that will be seen over and over again. And Rodwell will also sort of suffer in breakdown in part 3. And he is a children's illustrator as well. So we know that he like Robert has this sort of sensitive artistic side, and he becomes a victim of the war military complex, the system of war that will destroy his spirit. So like Leavitt, like all of these men, they will sort of meet a breaking point, and their sort of sense of right and wrong no longer holds up or holds true. Their worldview becomes sort of overshadowed by the horrific suffering of wartime. So that's Rodwell, and I want us to also talk about Harris, because his character, I think, is very important in regards to Robert's own sense of self. So Robert first met Harris when they were on the same ship coming over seas, and Harris is introduced on page 54. He was the young lad from Sydney, Nova Scotia. He was pale and always wore his collar up and his lapels spread inward across his chest. He had a pair of leather gloves that Robert admired. They were soft and lined with woven wool, but they were ruined. Harris had written holes in the tops of the index fingers. He was an only child who'd never been away from home. His mother died when he was 3, and he lived estranged from his father. a silent man who owned a shipping yard where fishing boats were made. Harris stood for long hours gazing out of the porthole, wishing that he'd seen a whale. And he wears this scarf, a wistful shade of blue. So Harris doesn't even make it to the front lines. He becomes sick overseas, and that turns into pneumonia. So he, like Robert, he is characterized as a kind of a fragile man, right? So he has this fragility. He's weak and somewhat sickly, not the model of the sort of hegemonic male, strong male soldier that we think of. And he's very much aligned with Robert in that they sort of bond during this time when they are both in the infirmary on the ship coming over. And Robert and Harris become, it seems, almost more than friends. There is almost like a love between these two men. Some critics have sort of talked about this as, more than a platonic friendship, that Robert was in love with Harris. But you could see this again as being one of those intense bonds that develops during times of war when, gender and sexuality aren't the only measures of manhood, I guess, in this sense. These are men who bonded together and they were going to face their mortality together as well. So this was a kind of intense bond that developed between them. And Harris is an interesting character, very unconventional. He's not only sort of fragile, but he's also very poetic. He'll talk about swimming in the sea and experiencing the ocean, and the way he talks is very poetic and philosophical. So Harris's fragility and his sickness remind me of, the character of Rowena, right? So just as Robert was sort of a guardian and loved Rowena, wanted to take care of her, he almost takes on that kind of caretaker role for Harris as well, staying with him during his final days. So it becomes apparent that Harris is going to die, and because he's estranged from his family, Robert is the only one who's there. And there's some interesting things that Harris says that indicate, his peculiarity. So he's not like other people, and he recognizes that. And then on page 93, he talks about himself swimming there like a seal in the water. And he says, out of my world into theirs, and I'd stay there hours, or so it seemed. I think I never have to breathe again. I've changed. It changes you, but the thing is, I could do it, change, and be one of them. They aren't any friendlier, the fish, but they accept you there, as if you might belong if you wanted to. It's not like here. It's not like here at all. So I think it's sort of indicating here his estrangement from his father as well, kind of suggests that Harris is a homosexual man. And you have to infer that, but we could see just that language of not feeling like he belongs, and the desire to be accepted suggests that he is struggling with not fitting in with the sort of conventional hegemonic types of masculinity. And this is possibly also why Robert bonds with him and stays with him in the last hours. And the fact that Taffler also is there to scatter Harris's ashes is also reinforces that idea.